Hello and welcome to Women's Football Hub. I am your host for this episode. I am Carolyn Kent, and I'm delighted to say that today I am joined by my first ever student co-host. I've always been a huge fan of mentoring, and I was very lucky throughout my career to have some great people essentially take me under their wing and give me a chance to learn. And I also believe that when you have the opportunity, you should offer help and opportunities. So I'm delighted to introduce you all to this week's student co-host, MSc Physiotherapy student Emily Howarth.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And imagine that today you're feeling slightly nervous about today because obviously you do know, full disclosure, our guest today, don't you?
Yeah, so me and Erin, we went to Lancaster University together for our undergrad doing sport and exercise science.
Yeah, and of course, without you, I would not obviously have the contact. So just goes to show if you offer opportunities, things come your way. So that leads me on to today's episode. Today we've got an episode for anyone really that's interested in research, primarily in women's professional football. But if you're interested in doing a PhD, this may be for you. And our special guest today is currently conducting a PhD with Manchester United, which is aiming to understand the ACL injury risk factors in women's football. She's previously been a sports science intern at Burnley Football Club, has a master's in research in medical sciences, where she worked with Manchester United men's team, looking at the demands in turns in Premier League matches in small-sided games. And she's here today to talk to us all about her research journey. Welcome to Women's Football Hub, Erin Griffiths.
Thanks for having me.
It's very nice to have you here. Can you start by telling me about yourself, your background, and what led you to pursue a PhD in professional women's football?
Absolutely. Yeah, obviously I had the pleasure of going to Lancaster with Emily. Actually, we knew each other a bit before then as well. I was a bit disappointed by that intro. We had played football since we were 15. But no, yeah, just played football most of my life. Went to Lancaster University, did sports science. At A-levels, I quite like the mathsy side of things. I was a bit on that nerdy side, so I did like maths and physics and PE, but I really enjoyed the PE the most. So yeah, I went and did sports science. That during my time at Lancaster, I did my dissertation with Nottingham Forest women's team, and I did a little bit of research on female athlete health. And at that point, I was like, oh, this is something that I'm really interested in. The opportunity then came up to work with Manchester United men's team for my Masters by Research. So at that point, I thought, can't really turn down something with Manchester United. And it was a cool topic area, but it wasn't the female health area that I was interested in originally. Did that Masters, really enjoyed it. And then I thought, actually, I'm really enjoying research and finding out new things. And I decided, to pursue a PhD. I applied for one before I got this one. So I applied for one, didn't get that. And then I applied for this one. And I got the one with Manchester United women's team. So yeah, I'm only 10 months in at the moment. So quite near the start of my journey.
You're very at the early stages, but I think I probably know the answer to this, but just to double check, what inspired your interest in women's football? And how has your kind of career path got you to this point with regards to women's football? Because you have obviously done history with regards to men's football.
I think growing up, it was always men's football that we all watched, and I had a sort of season ticket for 10 years watching men's football, and then women's football didn't really come onto my scene, apart from me playing it, in terms of like professional women's football until sort of as I was joining uni. I think that's when it started to rise a little bit, and I was like, oh, actually, there could potentially be a career in this. I think there was never an option for either playing. I wasn't good enough to probably actually play professionally, but there was never a playing or a sort of like backroom staff research career that I could see in women's football, just because the profession wasn't big enough. And then as I joined uni, I saw more and more job roles come up, and I thought, actually, yeah, this is something that I'd be really interested in. And I think as well, a lot of research has been done in men's football, but not a lot of research has been done in women's football. So I always just found that a little bit more exciting, because I was like, oh, there's actually way more in my mind anyway, like way more to find out here, and we're starting from a bit more of a blank slate. So that kind of was what interested me, I think.
And I think you make a really good point. I think there's more opportunities now coming in with women's football with regards to research, with regards to jobs and having careers within women's football. And it's really nice. And of course, I've got a co-host that is also potentially looking to maybe move in towards women's football, and especially with looking at further in her education. So Emily, big moment, on you go.
So Erin, as a fellow student, did you always plan to pursue a PhD, or was it something that kind of developed over time?
100% something that developed over time. I think when I got to the end of my third year, I wasn't even planning on doing a master's. I think the Manchester United, working with Sportline, the sport technology company, which was what my master's was, like when that came up, I was like, oh, actually, maybe I should do this master's. I was never like outwardly looking to do the master's. And because it was a master's by research, that's when I really delved into like the research world. I think prior to that, I was ready to go into the working world. I just didn't really see where I fit in that. So I think that's why I stayed on and did another year. And I think the whole COVID thing as well, like we'd had 3 years at uni, but we'd like 2 of those years really had been affected. So I think I was a big part of it was I wanted to stay at uni for another year. And then I just was, I think, fortunate enough to really enjoy what I did. So I definitely fell into it that way. And then, yeah, now I'm here. It's one of those I just wake up and I'm like, how have I ended up here? But it didn't really ever feel like an intention.
So what were some of the biggest surprises or challenges that you faced in your early stages of your PhD?
I think firstly the application process. That is a long old application process. For anyone who's thinking about doing a PhD, set aside some serious time to do the applications. I did 2 of them, but they require like a 2,500 word application with a full lit review, full project proposals. So some serious level of research needs to go into just the topic area you're planning on applying to. So that was a bit of a challenge. I also had to do mine whilst travelling, which wasn't ideal. I was doing it in like Cambodia on a laptop, had to find someone to do that. So that was definitely a challenge. And then once I'd started, because it's an industry-based PhD, it was definitely the sort of challenge of immersing yourself in an environment with a big group of players who are all lovely and all the staff are absolutely lovely, but research, fair enough, is low down on their priority list and their day-to-day. They want to win the next match. They're not too concerned what the state of my PhD is going to look like in 3 years. So it's about developing those relationships and trying to talk to all the staff and players so they understand why my research is important for them as well as for myself. And I found that quite challenging at the start because you are put into an environment where it's so fast paced, you don't almost want to get in the way. And I think that was something that I found challenging at the start. Now I've built those relationships with players and staff, it's a lot easier, but that was definitely my biggest challenge at the beginning.
So you're now 10 months in. What would you say has been the most unexpected thing about starting your research journey? And like you've just mentioned, are there any other moments where you've had to adjust your approach?
Yeah, I think my project's changed about 5 or 6 times, and we're only 10 months in. I think I went into it, and previously through education, so through my undergraduate degree and through my master's, it was very much what did I want to do, how did I want to run a project, and it was all based upon whether I was willing to put the work in, and but then you go in to do research in the field and you've got however many other stakeholders involved, you've got a whole team of players involved, you've got a whole team of staff involved. It's now no longer just what I want to do and whether I'm willing to put the work in. It's okay, how can I coordinate this many other people as well at the same time? So I think the biggest surprise for me was like, oh, it's not actually just going to go smooth sailing. Like I can't just implement something into here. So I'm like, oh, this would be really good. This would be a really good test to try and find out this answer. I can't just go in and do it. I've got to make sure I've spoken to what feels like 7 million other people, and everyone's been super helpful. Everyone is really helpful there, but it's just everything does move a lot slower, and like the learning to adapt has definitely been a big thing, because it's definitely not all just gone my way the whole time, which is absolutely fine, but it's definitely something that was an adjustment, because prior to that it was very much you're an undergraduate student, you run your own dissertation, like off you go, and it's when it's lab based that's quite easy to do, but when you are working with in a sporting environment, you just have to be at the mercy of the team a little bit. So that's definitely what I found.
Just to come in there, Erin, let's chat about your supervisors. Who's actually overseeing your PhD at the moment?
I'm very blessed to have a very large supervisory team. So my director of studies is Tom DeSantos. He is a lecturer at ManMet. He's specialises in change of direction mechanics, and he helped me a lot with my masters as well, which was how I found out about this PhD. So he focuses a lot on the movement mechanics stuff that I'm doing in my PhD. I've then got Phil Graham-Smith, who's a biomechanist, worked in Qatar for a lot of years with Aspetar, and that's also with Warren Gregson, who's another one of my more in-club supervisors. So he's a professor at the uni, but he's the main link between Manchester United and ManMet. I've got Naomi Datson, she's got loads of really cool links. She's a consultant for UEFA. She's worked with the FA. She worked with the England women's team for 10 years as an S&C coach. So she's got loads of unreal links and sort of knowledge in that area. And then I've got Tom Hughes, who worked at Manchester United as a physio for many years and now works at ManMet as a sort of physio lecturer. I'm hoping I'm getting all these credentials right. So that's my main supervisory team, but then I've got a lot of advisors around that. So I've got my in-club S&C coach, in-club doc, then there's Rich Hawkins, who's head of research and at Man United, Kirsty Elliott Sales helping out, she's one of the advisors, so she's helping with the hormone side of the project. So yeah, loads and loads of stakeholders, which, like I said, very blessed because there's lots of very cool people involved. But also that's another thing to juggle as well, because lots of different people have different opinions on things, which is both a blessing and a challenge.
I think that's the key thing. And just to bring you back to something you said earlier, you spoke about building rapport with the players and with the coaching staff, because you are right. Their focus, their priority is winning games. It certainly isn't research. Research is very possibly important to how they might win games later on. It's a big part of the process. But I think those communication skills are really important, aren't they? And I also like the fact that you said, do you know what? If I want to make a change to my PhD, I can't just go and do that. And I want to bring that in. Why can't you go and do that? What is the reason why you cannot just make a change? What do you have to do before you want to make a change to your PhD?
Absolutely. So for a little bit of context, at my PhD, we're looking at monitoring factors that are associated with ACL loading. From a physical capacity point of view, we're doing a testing battery, which we do each week. So we look at basically the strength of all the lower limb muscles that might affect ACL loading. We also are doing a movement profile, and we're looking at how hormones vary across the season. And then so there's lots of different factors that are going into this PhD, but that's all very integrated within the day-to-day of the club. So the players know they're going to do a screening once a week, 2 days after a game. The players know that they're going to be asked like when they're on and off their menstrual cycle, and to then do an ovulation kit and then have their bloods done at a particular time. To change something within the club in that kind of routine, for anyone who's ever worked in football, they'll know it's planned out by the minute. Like, we will walk to the pitch, it will take 5 minutes, we will then train for this amount of time, we will then walk back from the pitch, it will take this amount of time. So everything is fine. Machine, is that the saying? So to make a change to that, so they're used to this routine, so are the staff. To make a change to that, there has to be really clear rationale, and you have to be able to communicate why that's really important, because otherwise you'll get questions from both players and staff. So I think that's the in-club side, and that's why it's difficult, because they do, just like you said, have other priorities. And me saying, actually, can we do a different test? Like, or can we change how they do that test on that Tuesday? They're like, oh, we've been doing this for the last however long, why would you make that change now? There's that side, but then there's also the university side, and obviously you've got to get ethics passed through. So obviously we can't just go in and do research on anyone and try different things, and we make sure it's all cleared through the ethical board at ManMet. And that's a very, once again, for anyone who's done any research, that's a very vigorous process. And so there's all that side of things as well. So you've got to make a decision that you want to change something, you've got to build a very strong rationale, and then you've got to go via different lines of communication, whether it's in club or university, to get that passed through. Yeah, definitely have to be sure.
And I think sometimes that's something, certainly as somebody that oversees dissertations, I've seen that people have forgotten about that ethics process. You've told the ethics board you're going to do X, you cannot now go and do Y. If you want to make a change, it has to go back through ethics. And that's how we keep research essentially safe, and we make sure everybody knows what they're doing. So I love the fact that you start to go into what it is that you're obviously testing. So tell me a little bit more about your research focus with professional women's football. What specific topics or questions are you actually exploring? What did you narrow it down to?
So with ACL injuries, the more I read about it, the more I think, why have I picked this topic area? Is the amount of factors that could potentially affect ACL injuries in female footballers, or just in footballers in general, is huge. So I think although we're describing my project as a multifactorial approach, so we're looking at neuromuscular, we're looking at hormonal, we're looking at like physiological, biomechanical, we're looking at lots of different factors. We are trying to look at it from a monitoring point of view. So we're not trying to put in any interventions. We're not trying to say so-and-so is more likely to do their ACL at this time of the month, or so-and-so is more likely to do their ACL if they have knee valgus, or if they have... We're not trying to create these like sensationalist headlines. All we're doing at the moment is create these foundations for research, because we don't really have them at the moment in this population. We have a lot of ACL research, but it's quite often in hungover university students, really. Like, it's with sub-elite, which is it is very important as well, because these ACL injuries are happening in sub-elite footballers. But in terms of having it in the WSL, we've not had this kind of access to this population. So at the moment, it's very much observational. We're like monitoring how ACL loading factors change throughout a season, because that hasn't been done before. So yeah, we're looking at how quad strength, hamstring strength, soleus activation. Like, we're looking at how all the lower limb sort of muscle groups, how their strength changes throughout the season, and then also looking at movement quality as well, because I think that's a big thing. We've not actually, in female footballers, been able to look at their movement quality in the level of detail we're hoping we're going to be able to do it. So we're looking at the stereotypical, if you like, ACL mechanisms of injury. So 80% of them happen non-contact and whilst decelerating. And we're trying to say, okay, we know how they happen. Can we monitor these movements in a more controlled environment and see how they vary across the season? I hope that makes some level of sense.
Do you know what? It made tons of sense. And I think the other thing that I will say to you is, all of that's going to be so important. So if you think about some of the things you might think about, at what point you'll have international players that'll head off, they're still playing. Your other players may not be, they're just training. So that match load decreases for one set of players, but it actually goes up for the other because they're training at an international level. And then, of course, you have all those times of the season where you might have high muscular load, low muscular load. There's all those things to think about. And the fact that you're actually looking at that specifically in women also brings in what is the effect of the female physiology on all of that. So there's going to be so many things you're going to get from that. And I don't know about Emily, but I'm fangirling over this. Emily's the one that wants to find out about doing a PhD. What I want to talk about is your research journey, right? So your 3 years. What sort of kind of key milestones are in your sort of research journey?
I think this is definitely something that I didn't know before start. I was like, oh, let's do a PhD. But I was like, what actually is a PhD? So it normally is made up of 3 to 5 projects within this big topic area. So for myself, it's ACL injuries in female footballers. I started off with 5 projects and then went down to 4 because I realised someone else was doing a very similar project. Got 4 projects, and you can decide how you do them, whether you run all 4 at the same time next to each other. Some of them have to happen before others. So for example, for this testing battery, I had to test the reliability of each test. So that's something I'm doing at the moment. We had to make sure that we're not going to derive these big, like I said, headlines from tests that aren't actually accurate. So we had to do a reliability study first, and then so that's kind of year 1. It's make sure your testing battery's reliable, and then also try and start writing a narrative review, try and start looking at all the literature. So both myself has a better understanding of the literature, but also as something to publish in female football specifically, because quite often it focuses just on general male football. So that's my first year, narrative review and reliability study. I'm also doing a video analysis study, so that's like end of first year into second year. So we're looking at how mechanisms of injury in female football specifically. So I'm basically just watching knees pop all day, but I'm looking at hundreds of videos of ACL injuries and looking to see if we can see any patterns, whether that's environmental, scenario-based patterns, looking at the mechanisms, so the biomechanics of like how they're landing, and then also just things like the weather. There's barely any ACL injuries that occur found by a couple of papers now when it's raining. Just things like that we're trying to spot and see if we can find any patterns in. So that's kind of year 1 and year 2, those 3 projects. And then by the end of year 2, we should hopefully have a really sort of solid foundations of what we think is a good testing battery, both from a movement screening perspective and also a physical capacity screen. So once we've done that, we'll start like implementing that into the club. We're doing a version of it now, but that's not for my PhD. That's just more like a pilot testing. That's what they do in club anyway. So end of year 2 and 3 we'll be doing that, and then obviously the write-up. Does that make some sort of sense? So 4 different projects, and they all link to each other, and we use like the first 2, 3 to inform the big one at the end.
How has your research evolved since you first started? So have you had to pivot or adjust your focus based on what you found in your research?
I think I'm probably just about too early to say I've made a pivot in the direction. I think I've learned loads, whether that's just from even using at the start, I was like, oh my god, I'm going to use like hormonal testing, I'm going to do it to gold standard quality, which we have done, and that's not like for my research, that's more for in-club practice. But we were using it we were doing ovulation kits, we were getting bloods, tracking their cycles, and I thought that'd be a really good variable to use within my study. But as time has gone on, I'm like, oh, there's so many different profiles. Actually, can this be used as a variable? Because my sample size has now become so small that we've got some naturally menstruating with ovulation, some naturally menstruating without ovulation, some hormonal contraceptive, some non-hormonal contraceptive. And then all of a sudden you've got 2 or 3 people in each group, and you're like, actually, this isn't good science. I'm not gonna make any sort of like sweeping statements, or I'm not gonna find any significances that I'd actually be able to like hang my hat on just based upon 2 people. So in terms of little things like that, so I've started off with this really clear rationale of a group of players, and we will be able to see if there is a difference because we have tested them at different times of the month. And then as it's moved on, I've gone, actually, maybe that's not the best idea, and maybe we use it as a really sort of gold standard descriptive of our subject sample, so people have an understanding of which players we've got, but not necessarily, oh, okay, like this is like research that you should like. We're not using them in groups where you think, okay, that's actually like something we can derive meaningful change from. I think as well, just having so many different people inputting on the PhD, whether that's in club or from an academic perspective, I've learned loads about different tests, different ways to test, standardizing protocols. Who knew there were so many different types of reliability? Just learning loads of different things about how to run good research. So I think in that respect, yeah, I've definitely changed a lot, because my master's, although I'm still in the process of trying to publish that, but although I think that was done to a decent standard, doing a PhD where you've got to actively go and data collect as opposed to getting data given to you, I think, yeah, definitely, like, my research philosophies and how I view how to run research has definitely changed a lot already. And it's only 10 months in, which feels scary because I feel like I've only just started, but it's actually nearly a third of the way. So yeah, I hope that answers it, sort of.
Are there any surprising insights or trends that have emerged from your research that you can share with us?
Sorry, it's going to be really boring, but no, not yet. And we've not really collected enough data. It's like the first bit of your PhD is definitely just gaining that knowledge. I think I've really front loaded my time in the club, so I've spent loads of time building relationships with the players and the staff, so they trust my opinions or trust me to run the research. But in terms of noticing any trends like within the sort of the ACL research area, no, I'm not that far down the line. Maybe I'll come on and do another podcast at the end of 3 years and tell you some more, but
Erin's just worked out my plan. She's worked out the fact that I'm already in there to get that information when it's published. I've been found out.
Yeah.
So let's chat, Erin, about kind of balancing a PhD with other commitments, because obviously a PhD is an awful lot of work. How have you managed to juggle research, personal life, just keeping something for yourself, professional networking, all of the times where people like me are coming to you and saying, hey, do you want to come and talk on my podcast? How are you doing that?
I think that's definitely been a bit of a challenge. I think doing an industry-based PhD as well, I think it's so easy to get sucked into like life at a football club. It's cool, it's exciting. It's like an opportunity that I didn't think I'd get at this age, so I've obviously tried to like take it with both hands. But I think it got to just before Christmas and a few of my supervisors sat me down and was like, Erin, you can't be in the club like 4 days a week. You do know you've got like a PhD to do. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's so true actually, now you say it. Like, so I think I've definitely struggled to go from, it's basically juggling what you really want to do, and then also there are sides of the PhD that's sort of the harder like reading, writing side that you probably less inclined to want to spend a full day doing. So I think I found that bit a little bit difficult in terms of balancing the industry side or the in-club side with the university sit down, write and do your work side. So that's been tricky, and it's a 3-year funded PhD, and you've got to think like at the end of that 3 years your funding stops, so you've got to get the PhD done in that time. But most people you speak to never get it done in 3 years, or very rarely get it done in 3 years. So, and that's when they're doing it 5 days a week, and at the moment I'm doing it like 3 to 4 days a week. So I'm already thinking, gosh, I need to get cracking. And then because of that, it does seep into your evenings a little bit, because you're thinking, oh, I've actually not done any PhD work today. I spent the whole day, in the gym with the players, or I've been talking, or I've been outside at training, or I've been doing work in a football club, but it's not necessarily directly contributed to my PhD. So I think I think that's difficult, because then if it does seep into your evenings, then it seeps into your social life, which is also not, it's a 3-year long thing. You can't put your social life on hold. Hopefully Em can back me up. I don't think I've neglected it really just yet. But yeah, I think for me, prioritising spending time with friends and family is something that I like really value. I think I don't think I'd ever let that drop. Obviously, it just means you're busier. You don't get, it's not 9 to 5, shut your laptop, you're done. It's definitely, I would definitely confirm that. It's very early starts, first meeting of the day before 8 o'clock. You're then leaving 6ish or whatever time, and then you're coming back and doing a bit of PhD work. But at the moment, like I said, I'm only 10 months in. I've not found it too hard to balance both, but there's not a lot of alone time. I think you end up filling most hours of your day, but it doesn't bother me too much.
Let's chat about funding, because funding can be a major concern, because obviously you've got a fully funded PhD. So do you have any advice for anyone that's looking to secure funding, looking to secure a scholarship, looking to secure that sort of paid PhD?
I think it's something that's not spoken about enough in my mind. Is just, you don't get paid a lot. Like, it's every funded PhD. So like most people will do a funded PhD. I don't know a lot of people that will, fair play if you can go out and pay for a PhD and then not get paid for 3 years. Like, I'll give you credit where credit's due. That's pretty impressive. But most people will do a funded PhD, and the UK stipend now, I think, it's called a stipend, so it's tax-free. So you don't get taxed on it, and you don't have to pay any student loan whilst you're doing it. So it's just over £19,000, which translates to 1,600 a month-ish, around about. Obviously, I'm like, oh, that's fine. But if you're then paying rent, and then you're then paying just life, it's not like a big wage, especially if you're coming off the back of a degree and a master's, because you're thinking, I've got a degree and a master's and I'm getting paid like way less than all of my friends, and you're like, and then that's for 3 years as well, because it's not something that you're like, oh, you'll get a promotion within that 3 years, or you'll get a pay increase. So you definitely have to do it for the love of it. I think it's something that you have to be passionate about, because otherwise that can be a very like demotivating factor, because you're thinking, oh my god, I'm working all these really long hours and I'm not even getting paid that much. I think you like to think or hope that on the other side of it that you'll get some sort of like financial compensation for that. Like you'll be in a scenario like at the end of this 3 years I'll be able to say I've worked at Man United for 3 years and I've got a PhD. Like I don't know exactly what I want to do afterwards, but I'm hoping it's not going to be £19,000 a year. I'm hoping it's going to be a bit more than that. But yeah, I think in terms of securing funding, I don't know many PhDs where you can think of an idea in your head and then go to someone and then secure funding through that. It tends to be university lecturers have something they're interested in. Tom, my supervisor, was interested in ACL injuries in female footballers, so he's then put an advert out for my PhD, which is funded. So if you go and find a PhD.com, that's basically where hundreds and hundreds of PhDs are. They're all very specific and niche titles, but that is where most of the funded ones are. So I think, yeah, definitely something to consider, because if you just race into it thinking, oh, it'll be fine, like you have to think about the fact you are going to be you aren't being paid a lot for 3 years, and you are working long hours, and it is difficult. Make sure it is a topic area you are very passionate about, and you're not gonna regret that.
So advice for students who are starting to explore the PhD options and opportunities, what practical steps would you suggest they take to prepare themselves for the application process?
Yeah, so I think firstly, like I said, find something you are willing to read and write and just think about for the next 3 years. Like you have to be super passionate about it. And I think people say about PhDs, you know a lot about a little. Like you learn so much about such a niche topic. Like I could tell you a very lot about a singular ligament inside female footballers' knees. Like that is what I'm looking at for 3 years. Like so you have to make sure that it's something you can imagine being like, this is really interesting. I think if you don't enjoy doing the application process, then you will not enjoy doing the PhD, because the application process is like the world's smallest PhD. It's you write a literature review, you have to do your own research, you then write methodologies for projects you would hypothetically. Every application process is different, so don't take this as gospel, but for the ones I did, write a methodology for 5 different projects, and then you write your project aims and then what you would do and how you would implement the task. So you create this hypothetical PhD, and it's like a decent, like I said, I think mine were 2,500 words or 3,000 words. Like it's a decent length application on top of a cover letter, a personal statement, like filling in boxes about times you've showed experience doing this, times you showed experience doing that. So I remember like when I finally submitted my applications, it was like properly pages and pages long. If you don't enjoy doing that and you're thinking, God, I'm not finding it interesting researching this topic area for this application, then I think that would be a big warning sign at that point. But yeah, in terms of practical steps, I'd say contact people on LinkedIn. It does feel a bit icky, but I genuinely I messaged every man and their dog on LinkedIn for a good 6 months, being like, hi, I'd love to speak about, I say it's ironic because this is what I'm doing right now, but people love to speak about themselves. If you say, hi, I'd love to hear about your journey and how you did this, and just speaking, lots of people say yes. People are willing to help, and people are willing to sit and call and talk about themselves for half an hour. So like, I think I would do that. Yeah, talk to lots of people, network. Then yeah, just go and find a PhD.com, see if any of them are taking your fancy, and go from there, if that makes sort of sense.
So looking back then, if you could go back and give yourself a bit of advice before you started your PhD, what would you say to yourself?
I would say back yourself a little bit more. Like I think when I first went in, I was very like, oh, I don't know anything, because especially when you're going into a first team, like it was one of the biggest clubs in the world, and I'm going to the first team environment, and I'd done work at Burnley for a year, and I'd done work at Nottingham Forest for a year. The Manchester United res I did was very much like backroom staff. Like I was very much removed from the club. Like I used the club's data, but I wasn't like just in the environment. So I think when I went in, I was like, oh my god, how the hell have I ended up here? Like someone has got something seriously wrong. I definitely shouldn't just be like sat in this room right now. So but the more like time I spend there, the more I'm like, oh no, I've done enough research to know what I'm saying here. So I think at the start I was probably a little bit too, whatever you want to say, like whatever you think, to everyone who I had a conversation with, or I'd try and put an idea in, and if they were like, not sure, I'd be like, yeah, no, you're right, you're definitely right. And now I'm like, oh no, actually, the more research I do, the more I like back myself a little bit more. I'm happy to give my opinion and be like, oh no, I see why you said that. I think it might actually be this because X, Y, and Z. And like, I think I'm more comfortable having those conversations, but I'm not sure if that, I'm just going back and giving myself advice, because I think I would have done that regardless. But I think it's just a learning curve that you have to do. I think probably everyone does that in every career and every profession ever. But yeah, no, I think, yeah, just maybe back yourself a little bit more. But as Em probably also knows, I've never been particularly shy. I think it's not. the world's biggest issue.
You're perfectly confident, Erin. Finally then, what's one message that you'd like to share with students who might be hesitant about starting a PhD, obviously in a field that they are passionate about?
I think just go for it if it is something you enjoy. I was like, oh my god, another 3 years. Realistically, it is 3 years. If you come in straight off the back of a master's, you're in your early 20s. Worst comes to worst, you don't like it and you stop. It's not that. I just think I'm like trying to look at the whole thing with a bit of perspective at the moment. I'm like, it is actually only 3 years. It feels like a lifetime, but I'm nearly a year in and it feels like I've blinked. So if it's something you think you're going to enjoy, I would just say go for it. And not many people can get paid for just reading and writing about something they're really interested in. Most people are doing jobs where they're like forced to do something they don't particularly enjoy. But if you're doing a PhD in something you really enjoy, then it's okay. I know you don't get paid an absolute ton, but we're still getting paid. I'm getting paid to read and write studies and contribute to a field that I think's really interesting personally. I think I personally love it. So I think if it's something you think you're going to enjoy, then just go for it.
Erin, it's been absolutely lovely to have you on today. Obviously, if there is anybody that's kind of listened to this and thought, you know what, I'd really like to reach out to Erin because I'm thinking about a PhD, where would they get in contact with you?
Plug in the LinkedIn, isn't it? But yeah, no, just LinkedIn, I suppose. Erin Griffiths, and then look for my little icon. I don't know how else to describe it.
It's been great to speak with you, Erin. Hopefully this gives aspiring PhD students some valuable pointers.
I absolutely think that it will. And I'd also just like to say a huge thank you to Erin for coming along. Huge thank you to Emily, because by the way, for your first podcast, I thought you did absolutely amazing. I want to say to everybody that's listening, if you are considering a PhD, why wait? The moment is now. And I think with regards to certainly women's football, we're needing the evidence, and you will be part of shaping something that's going to be completely awesome going forwards. For those of you that are currently working with players, please follow the current evidence base that we have, and we will see you soon.
Thank you for listening to Women's Football Hub. The information within this podcast is for informational purposes only. No material on this podcast is intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please contact your doctor or another healthcare professional if you have any questions about anything raised in this podcast.